Hey guys, it's been a while since I've been able to do an overclocking video. Basically just haven't had the time all summer and other projects going on, but I wanted to get back to this one particularly. I don't remember if I told you guys. Let's see if we can maybe get this in the magnifier. It's still hard to read, but it must have been about a year ago last summer I bought up a bunch of parts off of a guy from Craigslist. This was one of the parts. This is Intel. It's a E2160 dual core. This would have fell right between like the Pentium Ds. This came out to replace the Ds, but it wasn't quite to the Core 2 duos, so these were just called dual cores. But this is a 1.8 processor, and just in a little time that I've played around with it, it did some pretty amazing things as far as overclocking. But I always wanted to see just how far we could push it and what the potential was, and do some benchmarking on it, because there's a number of sites online that allow you to post scores for like Super Pi, different things like that, to show what the processor will do. So I thought, what the heck, I got some time. I pulled the high-speed PC Tech bench out, and using the cheapy Gigabyte board. I don't even remember what model this is. There it is, the G31-ES2L, or I'm sorry, ES2L board. As you've seen in previous videos, it does pretty good for overclocking. For a $50 board, you can't beat it. And I figured, since this is basically probably about a $20 processor, if that, this would be a good project for just a budget overclock. I've got a cheapy old 600 watt power supply, old 80 gig hard drive, just basically used junk, just to see what we could do with it, what fun we can have with it, and how far we can push it. So anyway, I took the stock Intel cooler off. I was running that while I was using this processor actually in my home theater PC, and we're going to replace that with a Thermalright Silver Arrow. We might as well put a nice big cooler on there if we're going to push it. So let me see what we can do to get that ready to go here. Okay, we are pretty much ready to get started here. Everything is installed. I decided to just do away with the DVD drive because I was just going to get the software I needed off the internet. So no sense of adding anything extra to our setup. Want to take a second and just talk about different software and prepping for overclocking for people that haven't done it much or maybe need some tips on it. I got the basic software installed here that I normally use, being Prime 95 to test your overclock, CPU-Z to tell you what you're doing with voltages and speeds on the processor. I put Super Pi on here to use as a benchmarking tool to see what effect the overclock has on it, as well as real temp to keep an eye on the temperature itself to make sure we're staying within limits for the processor. Another thing I like to do is just take a notepad or whatever. Always keep a notepad and a piece of paper with you to write information down, things you've tried that worked and didn't work. I also go online and find all of the specs on the stuff I'm overclocking. Like in this particular case, it's the E2160 processor, and I write down the baseline speed of it, front side bus, stock, voltage range, which is really important so you don't get into too high a voltage and end up ruining your processor. This one has a safe voltage of 0.85 volts up to 1.5, as well as your T-case temperature, which this one is 73.3 Celsius. So we know if we're exceeding the temperature of the voltage on the processor. So we can try to stay in a safe range. I mean, if we're going for some sort of real world record on liquid nitrogen and don't care if we fry everything along the way, that's one thing, but to just play around with it and to stay safe, you really want to know what your guidelines are. But anyway, we're ready to start some baseline tests on this and see what temperatures and stuff do. It's still running at 1.8 at stock speeds. RAM is at 333. and 55515 clocks. This does not give me the option on this motherboard to separate the RAM from the CPU, so they will be being overclocked together, so we're probably going to have to adjust timings and stuff as we go. Temperature right now at idle is 21 degrees Celsius on both cores. So I'm going to run Prime 95 a bit and warm it up and see what our baseline temperature is with Prime running. Okay, Prime 95's been running for about an hour. We're not going to run it for a long time because we're not doing stability testing yet, but just to see what our max temperature was. If you can make that out there, it's 33 per core. So nice and cool considering running Prime 95 on it. We're going to stop this and do a Super Pi 1 meg test just so we get our baseline at stock speeds. Okay, our baseline results are in 34.063 is the fastest we did on a 1 meg. I ran it about 3 times, take the fastest score. And I think I forgot to mention before when I was showing the CPUs that we're currently at 1.2 volts. I don't plan on increasing the voltage yet. We're just going to pump it up with what we got and see what kind of speed we can get out of it. Okay, we're in the BIOS for this machine. As you can see, the CPU clock ratio here is 9, the default. CPU frequency 1.8 gigahertz, which is 200 by 9. A lot of times when you see people talking about overclocking or watch them overclocking, they'll do a 10% overclock, 15% overclock. Generally, if you get to like 20 or 25%, that's considered to be a pretty huge overclock. On this one, we're going to go right to 50% and see if we can get it to work. So we're at 1.9 now, so we want to shoot for roughly 2.7. So we're going to go down and enable our CPU host clock, and I think that's going to be around 295. Nope, 296. That's 2.66. I wonder if 300 even would, yeah, 300 even will give us our 2.7 gigahertz. As you can see here though, PCI Express is on auto. We are using onboard graphics, so I want to bump that up a little. I'm going to put that to about 103. Our RAM at standard 667 would run at 1000 at that rate. I don't think this cheap RAM would make it, so we're going to bump that down and see if we can run it at 800 instead. DRAM timing, the defaults are 55515 on this RAM, but since we're going to push it, we're going to loosen them timings up a little. Going to drop these down to 66617. I don't know necessarily if I have to. We could always try to tighten them back up again after, but just to make sure that it's going to work to start with. That's going to be it in the timing. Now in the voltages, because we are overclocking the RAM so much, I am going to add a tenth of a volt on the RAM, also a tenth of a volt on front side over voltage control, and I think we're going to go to like 1.325 for voltage. Default is 1.237. As we know from checking our notes earlier, that the voltage on this chip will run up to 1.5, so 1.325 is still a fairly safe setting. That shouldn't do any damage at all there. So let's save that and boot her up. Okay, we are up and running in Windows now, running Prime 95, 2 instances of it, 1 on each core. If you can read that, it says 2691.10, roughly 2.7 gigahertz. Core voltage right now is 1.28 with some V-core droop in this motherboard. I'm guessing it's going to run about 1.28, 1.29. Currently the temperatures are really good, 35, 36 degrees. We've had a maximum of 37 so far, but we just started Prime. So I'm going to let this run for a little bit and see how warm it gets. Okay, we've been running Prime 95 for a little over 3 hours. About 3 hours 20 minutes. I'm not going to do a 24-hour torture test on this yet because I want to see what's the max we can get out of this processor before we really worry too much about stability. I just want to make sure it's stable enough to keep rolling. Max temperature so far have been 42 degrees on each core, and it's been rock solid so far, so I think we're ready to take it to the next level, see what more we can get out of it. Okay, we're back in the BIOS now. It switched the front side bus from 299 up to 320. That's going to give us a 2.88 overclock, roughly 60% overclock. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to make that jump from 50 to 60 or not, but we'll try it. One thing I'm concerned about is the RAM. This is 666 RAM. It will be running at 853 at this clock. That might be a little high for this RAM. I'm not sure if it'll take it. We may need to switch over to some different RAM to push it beyond this point, but we'll see what we can do at this speed anyway. Well, I believe we have reached our threshold on the RAM. You can see the bus speed is running at 320. We're not blue screening or anything, but if you can see these little black pixels and stuff on the screen, that's because I'm using the onboard video on the motherboard, which is in turn using the RAM, and I think the RAM is just pushed a little beyond what it's capable of. Right now it's running at 426.7 versus the 333 that it's supposed to. Clocks are 57720, which is about as high as I can run them. So basically I think to stabilize this or go any higher, we're going to need to switch out that 333 RAM and put some 400 in here just to make sure it's not the RAM holding it back. Okay, well, it turns out the problem wasn't actually the RAM itself. It was actually the RAM doing the onboard video that was causing the glitches and the pixelization on the screen. So I just threw an old 8600 GT card in there just to turn off the onboard video so that we can keep that from holding us up. But if you can see now, it is running at 2.88. I've been running Prime on it for a little over an hour now just to check temperatures. Max temperatures have been 45 degrees on both cores, so still pretty decent. That also confirms that it's running at 28.8. So that's a 60% overclock. This is running at 1.296 volts, so we're not even using 1.3 volts on it. And it's not 24-hour stable yet, but certainly stable enough that I'm going to try to go a little higher with it. That's pretty good considering this is a 1.8 gigahertz processor, and we're pushing it over a gigahertz of overclocking on it, so that's pretty amazing for these CPUs. But let's see if we can take it to the next level. Okay, we're back in the BIOS. We're going to try to push this up to a 70% overclock now. To do that, I have to raise the front side bus from 320 up to 340, and that'll give us 3.06, which is exactly a 70% overclock. I'm going to try to do it with the standard voltage, leaving the CPU at 1.35. We'll see if we can do that. The RAM is going to go from the 800 up to 907. This isn't great overclocking RAM, so I'm not sure how that's going to work, but we'll give it a try. Okay, I've now been running Prime on it for about 2 hours. 7:32 I started running it. It's now 9:23, so almost 2 hours. Max temperature so far has been 46 on each core. As you can see, we are still running at the 306 on the processor with 1.296 volts, so less than 1.3 volts on it. Pretty amazing. That's a 70% overclock. It's not 24-hour stable yet, but stable enough that I think we can move ahead and try to get a little more out of it even. Okay, I've now bumped it up to the next level. Basically all I'm doing is increasing front side bus about 20 megahertz at a time. So now we have the bus speed up to 360. On this particular processor with a multiplier of 9, it basically ends up being an extra 10% overclock with every 20 megahertz I add to the front side bus. So technically this is 80% overclock now over stock. It's running at 3.240, or I'm sorry, 3240. Voltage now is up to 1.36. I actually set it at about 1.425, I believe it was in the BIOS. So we're definitely getting some voltage droop on the processor. But actually it's been pretty stable so far. I've been running Prime 95 on it. Let's see, 2014. It's now 10:12, so it's been running for a couple hours, about almost exactly 2 hours. Temperature has been 53 max on both cores, so still not too bad considering how far we're pushing it. I'm gonna stop Prime 95 here, and okay, yeah, 1 hour and 57 minutes, 0 errors, 0 warnings, so very solid for 80% overclock. So I guess we'll try to get some more out of it. Okay, we had to back the overclock down a little. It was running at 3.24 and it was pretty solid at that, but sometimes I had some startup problems with it where I had to start it a couple times to get it to boot, and without pushing a lot more voltage it just wasn't worth the extra couple hundred megahertz. So we backed it down to actually 3.06 right now, which is a 70% overclock. Pretty happy with that. It's 100% stable at this point. Max temperature is 51 on the cores, and it's actually running at about 1.36 or 1.37 volts, so still quite a ways away from that 1.5 that the manufacturer recommends. Now I have seen these processors run 4 gigahertz or higher with certain motherboards, certain setups. They could be pushed higher, but with this budget setup that we're running it on, kind of ghetto setup, that I'm pretty happy with the 70% overclock. We're going to stop this and run a SuperPi now and see what our speeds are. Okay, we just finished the SuperPi run. If you can make that out there. 1 meg test, 21 seconds, 0.84. Quite an improvement over the 34.06 that we were at stock speed. I also, because we backed down the overclock, was able to drop the voltage down some. We're back down to under 1.3 on the V core now. Still running at 3.06, but by dropping the V core down I was able to drop temperatures down a little too. So far our maximum's been 27 on one core, 28 on the other. So I would feel comfortably fine running this overclock 24/7 with this voltage and these temperatures. It's perfectly safe to run for gaming or anything. And maybe in the future when we pull out like maybe one of the Asus boards I do have laying around, maybe we'll try this again and see if we can push it a little higher on a board where we can separate the RAM from the CPU. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to comment and subscribe.